The Graduate Institute's Geneva Trade Platform proudly presents e-commerce terminology for trade negotiators.
E-signatures and e-authentication. Now, when we conduct cross-border trade transactions, there are often many documents involved. There's customs docs, there's bills of lading, there's other documents which you have to fill in triplicate many times. And a lot of them require wet signatures to be legally valid. Now, the wet signatures do not necessarily need to just mean the actual signature, but they could also be required red stamping, for example, or the literal rubber stamps. The COVID movement restrictions in many countries have affected a lot of the normal in-person operations, ports, customs authorities, any sort of movement between borders. It means it was really challenging to obtain wet signatures in a timely manner. A lot of times you actually need to cite these documents. And I know a lot of my friends who are working in customs are like, I actually have to go into the office to cite these documents. Really a pain. So even before COVID, wet signatures impeded the speed at which trade could be done because you had to get them wet signed, you had to scan them, and very importantly, they were no longer machine readable. Then you can imagine the impact that this has had on trade. This means inefficiencies, inaccuracies, when you have blurry scans, possible forgeries and fraud. E-signatures are simply a way to digitally sign documents, and e-authentication is a way to verify that that signature is authentic, and therefore it is important to ensure that both the signature and authentication both match. The mutual recognition of the standards or brands, for example, of the digital signatures and authentication formats is the step that we all need to take when regard to e-commerce.
Well, we heard from Mayan the technical definition of e-signatures and authentication. The trade aspect of this is terribly important because if we look at what trade negotiators actually address when it comes to regulatory disciplines and adopting treaty obligations that facilitate cross-border and cross-jurisdictional business, we will see that the broad range of objectives behind these kind of provisions would be aimed at promoting competition, predictability of the business environment, facilitating cross-border trade and cross-jurisdiction interoperability. Sometimes they even touch on elements of institutional reforms, but mainly all those obligations are directed towards how to facilitate, but at the same time secure trade contractual obligations and rights. With respect to the use of electronic means to replace paperwork, this is not really a new concept. We've seen this since the beginning of the negotiations of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. And I think with the development of technological tools, this has moved towards a new area of sophistication about how these methods can be used to facilitate cross-border trade. And with the technological developments, there is always going to be also new regulations in different jurisdictions. This is why tools relating to regulatory cooperation are also very important in this respect. Mutual recognition is one of them because regulators do not always find an international circle or forum in which they would develop commonly agreed standards that they would follow so that interoperability across jurisdictions would be facilitated. Now, when it comes to e-signature and authentication, achieving progress down that road would definitely go a long way in facilitating cross-border and cross-jurisdictional trade, particularly when it comes to e-commerce, where the products that are being exchanged are intangible products. They don't go through customs and border checkpoints where they are checked physically. There are no borders in digital trade that can be used as a policy instrument to verify or authenticate. Now, this has gone a long way in regional trade agreements, and we see examples. It is also being discussed multilaterally in the WTO, but it is important to have a clear definition in mind as to what that means, and also why is it so important for international trade. And let me stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you for following this course on e-signatures and e-authentication. Additional readings and materials are available below. You can also ask questions and discuss the course with fellow students using the link below. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and stay up to date with the Geneva Trade Platform.